Michelle Obama. Our political specialist, Sean Boyd, talked with Congressman Joe Neguse about what he'll be watching for as the convention continues.
Congressman Joe Neguse, thank you so much for joining me as this really unconventional Democratic National Convention unfolds. The theme is unity, and the first night speakers really showcased just how diverse of a coalition Democrats hope to unite this year. We had Senator Bernie Sanders, a Democratic Socialist, former Ohio Governor John Kasich, a Republican, and Michelle Obama, who's more the establishment centrist Democrat and all-around rock star. You, more than any member of Congress I know, have been able to garner the respect from both wings of the party. How do you unite them?
It's great to see you, Sean, and thanks for having me on. You know, I think your characterization of last night, of the first night of the convention, is correct, which really was all about unity and trying to bring the party together. And I think the speakers that you mentioned, everyone from Senator Sanders to, of course, the former First Lady Michelle Obama, and even some Republicans like former Governor of Ohio John Kasich, reflect that ultimately we're a big tent party, and that our party has room for, a large diversity of views. And so to the extent that, our challenge over the course of the coming weeks is not just to unite the party, but unite the country. In my view, the most compelling way to do that is to really unite around our common set of values, right? I mean, fundamentally, we may disagree on the nuances of public policy, but at our core values and wanting to bring humility and empathy and a basic decency and sense of humanity back to our politics and to our body politic, to me, is something that I think the American people very much want to see. And I think that was reflected in the reaction to the speeches last night. Again, very diverse set of speakers, and yet the common thread in each of their speeches was this recognition that Joe Biden, former vice president, is a fundamentally decent and kind human being who ultimately will do what he can do to listen to all voices and govern as someone who understands that we're all in this together. So that's, I think, the key to uniting, again, not just the party, which has very disparate views depending on, where you land on the political spectrum, but frankly, uniting the country.
So I want to talk about the VP nominee for a moment here. People often vote, I think, based on how they feel about a candidate. Do they like them? Do they connect with them? Their story is important. And Kamala Harris has truly an extraordinary story. But as a former prosecutor, her style seems to be to focus on facts and not feelings. Why do you think that strategy this year might work against a candidate like a Trump in a year like this?
Well, my sense, Sean, is I think that you can both be someone who focuses on facts and has a very kind of fact-driven approach, but yet also be someone who understands and empathizes with others and is willing to share, some of their story as you seek to build partnerships and bridges to people who might have a different worldview than you. Kamala Harris, the senator, is someone whom I've gotten to know quite well as a fellow member of the Congressional Black Caucus, serving with her in the Congress. We've partnered on a number of bills, including on price gouging and some other efforts over the course of the last 2 years. I have found her to be a deeply engaging leader, somebody who leads from the heart. She is very much someone who I think cares about making sure that working families in our country get a fair shake. And so I think you're correct in the sense that most Americans have seen her. Her most high-profile appearances, of course, in the national stage have been in her capacity as a senator on the Judiciary Committee and the Intelligence Committee. And as someone who serves on the House Judiciary Committee, I can tell you that work is by its nature much more based on your sort of skills as a lawyer and your ability to examine witnesses and question them and so forth. But I think you will see, both during the course of her speech this week and I think over the course of the next 2.5 months, the Kamala Harris that I suspect every voter in California knows, and certainly all of her colleagues in Congress know, which is someone that deeply, deeply cares about our country and is one of the most compelling public speakers that I've had the privilege of serving with in Congress. And she very much is someone who, I think has a very compelling story to tell. And of course, I say that as somebody who, is the son of immigrants. And so to see someone like Senator Harris, who also was the daughter of immigrants, just like my parents, to now potentially be the vice president of the United States. To me, that is reflective of everything that is good and great about our country. So I'm excited for her convention speech in a few days.
Yeah, I was going to say this comes from somebody who also has a pretty extraordinary story, you yourself, and is quite articulate. To win a race, it can't just be, why not the other guy or gal? You have to give voters a reason why you. What do you think is the most important issue in this election, and why Biden-Harris? Why Democrats to address it?
Yeah, I think, of course, it's going to depend on a particular voter, right? Every voter approaches their decision differently in terms of the issue that is most important to them, that resonates with them or their family. But I suspect, just based off my conversations with so many constituents and folks in my community, that the overarching issue that I think will shape the contours of this election cycle is really leadership. And in my view, and I think in the view of Vice President Biden and Senator Kamala Harris, a lack of leadership at the federal level, a leadership, again, that recognizes that we are all in this together as a country, a leadership that's going to ultimately rely on evidence-based decision-making to guide where we go as a nation. And so, of course, the two crises that our country is facing simultaneously, both the COVID-19 public health crisis and the economic fallout that really is a byproduct of the first crisis that I mentioned, both of those require presidential leadership. And unfortunately, we haven't had that. And so in my view, I think that will be ultimately be what is on the top of mind for most voters as we head into the fall, is thinking about their daily lives, the way in which the COVID-19 pandemic and the clear signals of a recession that we're potentially entering into is impacting their own lives and livelihood. And, I believe this will be arguably the most important election of our lifetimes. When you think about the scale and the enormity of just those two crises that I mentioned, not to mention the many other, the litany of problems and challenges we face as a country, and the need for a leader like Joe Biden to step forward and inspire us to ultimately solve those problems together. So that's how I think this election will shape up, and I have every expectation that Vice President Biden will be President Biden come November, provided we do everything we need to do to turn out the vote in the next few months.
Finally, I'm going to switch gears a little bit here, and I want to talk to you about the situation with the U.S. Postal Service. And I just want to say to everybody watching, you saw this coming, to some extent, at least, back in March. And we did a story on a funding bill, and here we are 5 months later. Where is that funding bill? What are the chances of passing, chances of it being signed into law, and what happens if it's not?
It's a great point, Sean. And truth be told, it's really my constituents who were prescient in terms of, them flagging for us this issue way back in March. I mean, the reason is, most of the bills that I introduce in Congress are inspired or motivated by stories from the district that I get to represent in the United States Congress. And so we had heard from a number of constituents who back then were already starting to experience some significant delays in the Postal Service in Evergreen and other parts of the area that I represent. And so we introduced this bill, as you mentioned, to provide $25 billion of an emergency appropriation to the Postal Service. That number was not an arbitrary number. It was very specific. It was pursuant to the request that the Board of Governors of the Postal Service had requested of Congress. And the Board of Governors is a board entirely appointed by Donald Trump. They're all individuals that were appointed by the president. So it was clear to me early on that this clearly was something that merited congressional action, that warranted our attention. The warnings, signs were going and the alarm bells were going off, even though it had not necessarily permeated the public square as much as I would have liked, notwithstanding that you also were prescient in talking about it and covering this story and talking to constituents early on. Of course, now we see 4 or 5 months later, just the tragedy that has unfolded and the reality of terrible decision after decision made by those in leadership at the Postal Service, the Postmaster General. And of course, the lack of funding has only exacerbated some of the operational decisions that they've made. We are hearing from constituents every day. I can't tell you how many people have contacted our office in Fort Collins, Loveland, Boulder, Evergreen, Granby, across the state, who are having delays with, relying on the mail, for small businesses who are relying on the mail for payments and to transact commerce, veterans, folks who are relying on medicine. I mean, it really is a crisis. And so my hope is that we'll be able to pass a bill in the coming days. As you know, Congress has been called back, so we'll be traveling back to Washington, D.C. to take up legislation to reverse the changes that the Postmaster General had implemented. My understanding is because of public pressure, because of the constituents who raised their voices, the Postmaster General announced today, just a few hours ago, that he would essentially postpone any further changes until after the election. While that is a heartening sign, and that's, I think, again, in large part because of constituents and the public who have raised their voices, at the end of the day, it's not enough because there have been so many changes that have been implemented already. We've got to make sure that those are reversed so that we ultimately can address some of these real backlogs. But it's a disaster, and it's a disaster of our own making. That's the part that's so frustrating to me. The Postal Service is not it shouldn't be a partisan entity. I mean, it's a service that every American relies on, irrespective of their political affiliation. We ought to treat it like that. So we're going to continue to push. And the bill on Saturday, which is kind of unheard of for us to be voting on a Saturday, this coming week, but it will include my appropriation request for $25 billion. So hopefully we can get that to the president's desk soon, and I hope the Senate will follow our lead.
Yeah, it's so interesting how seemingly everything, even mail, becomes partisan these days. Well, it is always great to talk to you. Thank you so much for taking the time. I know you're very busy, so appreciate it.
Oh, you as well. Thank you, Sean.